Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Your Excellency, Your Honors, distinguished speakers, panelists, moderators, and honorees. My name is Lauren Ormsby, and I'm a partner at Bernstein, Litowitz, Berger, and Grossman. My firm, together with Epic and the Huntington Bank, are co-sponsors of this amazing New York City Bar third annual International Law Conference on the Status of Women. This conference is also co-sponsored by the New York State Bar Association and the American Bar Association. I'd like to welcome all of you to this special conference that is dedicated to celebrating the women working to make our world a safer, more secure, and better place for women and girls. Today, we will hear from almost 24 advocates who are fighting for the human rights of women and girls. These women understand that if we want to increase the level of humanity and empathy in this world, we must start by elevating the status of women and girls in every country, every society, and every community on every continent. No woman or girl can be left behind. Today, we celebrate International Women's Day, and this year, for the first time ever, the International Day of Women Judges on March 10th. This conference is held in the lead up to the 66th regular session of the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations, which will take place starting on March 14th. We're here to celebrate amazing women and the important work we do. With them comes hope for a brighter future. It cannot go unnoticed, of course, that this is a particularly frightening and tragic time in the world, with a terroristic invasion waged in Europe and thousands of people dead already, women and children among them. Sadly, women and girls face additional crises throughout the world. We dedicate today to the women and girls of Ukraine and Afghanistan, but also to women in South and Central America, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, who are facing tremendous violence due to wars and armed conflict, leading to the forced exodus of many from their homes. Women and girls now make up half of the world's 86 million refugees, a number that has increased by well over 1 million in just the past week. Together with displaced persons and refugees, there are 150 million homeless people in the world, the majority of whom are women and children. And even today, while women are often the caretakers and first responders when crisis hits, their voices are often left out of the policies that are designed to protect them. In addition to poverty and other issues that all refugees may face, women refugees have an added layer of oppression from gender discrimination and violence. Marginalized women, included refugees and displaced persons, as well as those facing extreme poverty, face sexual and gender-based violence and child marriage, many as they are facing conflict and seeking shelter. Moreover, COVID-19's constraints trap many women and girls with their abusers, leading to a spike in domestic abuse worldwide. There's not enough time in one day to tackle all of the critical issues facing women throughout the world, but today's conference will address some of these issues. The program today consists of 3 panels, which will focus on separate legal and policy issues confronting women around the world. The 2021 priority theme of the UN Commission on the Status of Women focused on women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence. Today's first panel follows up on that theme by discussing the pursuit of justice for women who have been victims of grave atrocities in conflict zones and modern-day genocides. This panel will explore the engagement of survivors of such violence in the process of justice and the use of universal jurisdiction to convict the perpetrators of the most serious international crimes. The second panel will explore the UN Commission on the Status of Women's 2022 theme of achieving gender equality and empowerment in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. And our third panel will provide gripping, firsthand, behind-the-scenes accounts of the dire plight of Afghan women judges, prosecutors, and lawyers, including those who remain trapped in the country today, as well as those who have escaped, as we celebrate the sisterhood of these courageous and inspiring women worldwide who are continuing to fight for the women and girls and the future of Afghanistan. In addition to celebrating the women advocates who are out front fighting for women and girls with the Epic Women Organization and Huntington Bank Her Hero Awards, we are here to celebrate the work of Her Excellency Pramila Patten, the United Nations Under Secretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. 5 years ago, Secretary General Antonio Guterres appointed Pramila Patten of Mauritius as his special representative on sexual violence in conflict at the level of Undersecretary General. Ms. Patten, here with us today, a practicing barrister at law, served since 2003 as a member of the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. She brought solid and diversified judicial expertise in sexual and gender-based violence, as well as expertise in women, peace, and security issues to her role as Undersecretary General. Since her appointment, Undersecretary General Patten has given a voice to the voiceless on a global scale. She and her staff have helped governments and policymakers around the globe understand how sexual violence is used as a modern day and ever-growing ubiquitous tactic of war and terrorism. Undersecretary General Patten has bravely spoken out for the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, the Central African Republic, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, Libya, Mali, South Sudan, the Syrian Arab Republic, Yemen, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cote d'Ivoire, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Myanmar, and most recently on the threats posed to the women and girls of Ukraine. Pramila Patten has recently courageously advocated for the rights of children born of sexual violence to be given what is their human right, the right to a name, a birth certificate, and the rights of their mothers who are born children of rape to keep the children, even when their own communities shun them both. She's also championed compensation for survivors of sexual violence so that society also contributes to the burden that each survivor bears. Undersecretary General Patten has also worked recently to bring to light the stark consequences of COVID-19 on vulnerable victims of domestic violence. As the Undersecretary noted last year, conflict is compounded by this pandemic, which impacts very negatively on survivors of sexual violence, making women and girls a lot more vulnerable to sexual violence and impacting reporting, because the normal channels for reporting and documenting abuse did not operate fully during the pandemic. Perhaps no other official on earth understands what sexual violence does to women and girls, hollowing them out from the inside with the burden they physically and psychologically carry for their entire lives. Undersecretary General Patten, today we wish to honor and celebrate you. We thank you for your extraordinary work in the areas of the safety and security of women and girls. We are delighted that for the third year in a row, you have agreed to attend this event. On behalf of all of the attendees and sponsors, we are so grateful for your presence because you have helped elevate this event to the stature of what it is today. You have an open invitation from the New York City Bar Association, the New York State Bar Association, and the American Bar Association, and many more bar associations around the world to partner and collaborate with us and your Excellency's office. Consider us your partners in justice. For the safety and security of all women and girls, let's take this journey together to create a strong sisterhood for the global good of humanity. Without further ado, please welcome Undersecretary General Pramila Patten.
Thank you, Lauren, for these kind words, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I'll start by wishing all of you a happy International Women's Day. I am so honored to be among such great women and to be addressing the New York City Bar Association on this International Women's Day at the 3rd Annual International Law Conference on the Status of Women. I'm also humbled to be amongst the honorees of the Epic Women Organizations Award for 2022. The New York City Bar Association's commitment to international affairs and cooperation, human rights and gender justice makes it truly a world leader for those like me who have practiced law, demonstrating what local bar associations can do to ensure a commitment to the rule of law at local, national, and global levels. I join you, Lauren, in having a special thought for the women of Ukraine, Ethiopia, in Tigray, but also Afghanistan. Now, more urgently than ever before, we need that commitment to multilateralism, the rule of law, and gender equality. And today's International Women's Day comes at a time of great global turbulence, marked by multiple intersecting crises in which women's rights and physical and economic security are under threat. As the Secretary General has rightly stated, the world is too small for so many hotspots. Over the past year, my mandate has monitored the conflict in Tigray, Ethiopia, which has resulted in women being driven from their homes by violence, including rape and gang rape, often committed at gunpoint, with a level of cruelty beyond comprehension. Our attention was also focused on women in Afghanistan, who must navigate the new reality of Taliban rule under the most perilous humanitarian circumstances, which has turned back the clock on women's rights. We have seen global pandemic recovery intersect with an epidemic of coup at an unprecedented level in modern times, from Myanmar to Sudan to Central African Republic, Mali, where sexual violence has been reported, including against peaceful women protesters, and in Mali and Guinea, where justice processes for sexual violence survivors have faced setbacks and delays. I have recently called upon the parties to the conflict in Ukraine to ensure the protection of women and girls from sexual violence, including the hundreds of thousands displaced both internally and to third countries, in accordance with international humanitarian law and Security Council resolutions. And conflict continues to march on in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, Syria, South Sudan, and elsewhere. Century after century, women have been treated as the spoils of war. Since time immemorial, rape has been used to control women's sexuality, labor, and reproduction, to shred the social fabric, to conquer territories and populations, and to crush the enemy's morale and will to resist. From the wars of antiquity to the complex security landscape of the 21st century, looting, pillage, and rape remains the trilogy of wartime terror. And the effects are magnified when the perpetrators hold positions of power, which further erodes trust and confidence in governance institutions. Historically, mass rape has been met with mass impunity, barely receiving a line in war reporting or courts martial. In male-dominated security discourse, rape was ranked lowest on the hierarchy of wartime horrors, as a lesser evil relative to the lethal violence of the battlefield. It was dismissed as cultural and collateral rather than criminal, a private tragedy rather than a tactic, a side issue rather than a threat to our collective security. Since the conflicts of the early 1990s in the Balkans and Rwanda, and the work of feminist groups, a new policy consensus has emerged. Today, sexual violence is less tolerated and more regulated. It is less silenced and more systematically reported. More diplomatic measures to prevent, mitigate, and address wartime rape have been put in place over the past 20 years than in the rest of human history combined. And this includes a series of 10 robust Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security, half of which are specifically focused on combating conflict-related sexual violence. 8 sanctions regimes now include sexual violence as part of their designation criteria, which puts past and potential perpetrators on notice. More women blue helmets and women protection advisors have been deployed to the field, and conflict-related sexual violence is routinely included in the mandates of peacekeeping missions as a core protection of civilians' objective. There are also more prosecutions of sexual violence at both the national and international level, including most recently in the Maya Achi cases in Guatemala, and the case of Anwar from the Syrian Intelligence Service, who was prosecuted for crimes including sexual violence in the Koblenz trial in Germany. Despite this, War's oldest crime remains a constant threat with every new wave of warfare. Achieving tangible change will require a paradigm shift in the way we confront peace and security challenges. No amount of protection or assistance is a substitute for peace, inclusive democracy, and the rule of law. And addressing sexual violence is an integral part of broader political and democratic transitions. In that context, policies of zero tolerance for war crimes against women cannot carry zero consequences. All tools must work in tandem to compel parties to comply with international law and to safeguard women at risk, including legislative reform, training of judges and security sector personnel, monitoring, and accountability. This comprehensive approach is reflected in the 11 joint communique and frameworks of cooperation that my office has signed with conflict-affected countries to anchor national ownership. A shift in paradigm and perspective is also essential to ensure that local realities guide the global search for solutions. The survivor-centered approach, which I have made a priority of my mandate from day one, aims precisely to amplify first-hand frontline perspectives and has now been anchored in Security Council Resolution 2467, adopted in 2019. This approach views survivors not as passive beneficiaries, but as the co-creators of solutions. Critically, it does not only apply to relief and recovery, but also to upstream prevention efforts. Local women are often the first to raise the red flag about impending security threats, and yet they are still the last to be heard and heeded by security authorities at the local, national, and global levels. Despite these challenges, my mandate continues to work towards sustainable solutions and to turn commitments on paper into compliance in practice. Last year, on the 19th of June, the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, my office launched model legislative provisions and guidance on the investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence. This tool is based on best practices at both national and international level and is intended to be used by practitioners and legislators to ensure survivor and victim-sensitive justice for conflict-related sexual violence. My team of experts on the rule of law on sexual violence in conflict continues to deploy to conflict zones, including during the pandemic, namely to the Central African Republic, Guinea, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as part of efforts to strengthen national capacity to ensure that governments can address impunity for these crimes. The UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict Network, which I chair, and which has grown to 21 entities across the full range of peace and security, human rights and justice, humanitarian and development actors in the United Nations system for coordination and catalytic projects on the ground. We continue to address emerging issues important to the welfare of survivors. My office recently compiled a special report of the Secretary General on the rights and needs of survivors who become pregnant as a result of sexual violence in conflict and children born of wartime rape, with concrete recommendations to ensure that national policies uphold the rights of survivors and the children born of such violence, including national policies and laws that ensure their rights and prevent all forms of discrimination against them. Other recommendations in the report include the need to ensure that there is funding for multi-sectoral assistance, including legal assistance, medical and psychosocial services, and sexual and reproductive care, including access to emergency contraception and safe termination of unwanted pregnancy, and socioeconomic reintegration for survivors and all of their dependents. I urge you to read the report on this important yet historically invisible subject. My mandate also continues to support survivor-sensitive demands for reparations, including by assisting countries to adopt reparation laws. But we are still struggling with implementation gaps, especially in terms of financing and ensuring adequate budgetary allocations for the implementation of these laws. I can assure you that reparations are what survivors of sexual violence demand most from justice processes, but receive least. And we must, as an international community, do better. My office is not merely reactive to events, but aims to prevent conflict-related sexual violence from occurring in the first instance. To this end, we are currently developing a robust prevention strategy to address the root causes of conflict-related sexual violence and to save succeeding generations from this scourge. In addition, the annual report of the Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence, compiled by my office and due to be debated by the Security Council next month, is focused on structural prevention and resilience building against the backdrop of increasing militarization, reprisals against women's human rights defenders and activists, and shrinking civic space. I would be remiss not to mention for a moment this year's priority theme for the Commission on the Status of Women, namely empowering women and girls and achieving equality in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction. Unless we take urgent measures now, as countries face pressures from climate change, we will see conflict over resources, both geopolitically and domestically, risk to the stability of already fragile governments and economies, and increasing forced migration and displacement. All of these are risk factors for conflict-related sexual violence against women and girls. However, we are not powerless, and women and girls, including survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, have often become activists and agents of change. Let me conclude by noting that the New York Bar Association has a key role to play in the fight against conflict-related sexual violence and gender equality more broadly, through the reports of your various committees, through the pro bono work that you do, and the experience you can share with other bar associations, both within the United States and abroad. If the unprecedented events of our time have taught us anything, it is that we need international cooperation and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms to make progress on global challenges. Gender equality is the #1 predictor of peace, more so than a nation's level of development, democracy, or religious and ethnic identity. I hope on this International Women's Day that we can recommit ourselves to the cause of women and girls globally and to ending the scourge of sexual violence, which serves to oppress and silence them in times of war and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary General, for those beautiful and important remarks. We are so honored to have you with us today, this third year that you're with us. We follow your work, we honor your work, and your work is extremely important to the New York City Bar, as well as so many other bar associations around the world. And we look forward to collaborating with Your Excellency to continue your outstanding work.